I do think that we have, I don't know what percentage chance to put on it, but it is not zero chance, and it is not, 30% chance. I think it's better than that we will win. I don't know what percent to put on it. I just think that we have a pretty good argument, and it's demonstrated by the quality of the bill that got passed and signed here in Illinois, and the commentary of the appellate court judges. We can't allow people to have shoulder-fired missiles. There's some limit to what we can allow people to have, and they're going to have to recognize that it shouldn't be a popularity contest.
That was Governor J.B. Pritzker last night at a fireside chat talking about gun control, and he had about an hour-long conversation with somebody asking questions and also taking questions from members of the audience. Good morning, Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. And, of course, we've got lawsuits against Illinois gun laws in a variety of fronts, both in state and federal courts. And top of mind for a lot of people is the Protect Illinois Communities Act, which obviously is the ban on certain semi-automatic firearms and magazines over certain capacities that the legislature defined as, quote, assault weapons. So obviously that's tied up in the appellate court right now, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals for the federal courts, and we have yet to get indication as to when that's going to be determined. But let's go ahead and get into this, because there's a lot to unpack with the governor in his fireside chat last night, including the issue of license plate readers. Is he hinting at that as a tool to possibly cut down on the issue of gun trafficking from other states? Here's the governor talking about that.
So we've got, a pretty good handle on what we need to do. The challenge, of course, is you don't know which cars. We're not allowed to track which cars are driving from Chicago across the border, going to an Indiana store, buying a gun, and coming back. We're not allowed to track that car. On the other hand, we can watch the routes that are normally taken from Indiana back into Illinois, and with a variety of technology and other things, make a reasonable guess. And again, using only probable cause and other things to pull them over. But we have to do more of this. We just have to.
So did the governor say the quiet part out loud there? We'll actually touch on this a little bit later on, but those are some of the big things that popped out from the nearly hour-long fireside chat. And, of course, I'd love to hear from you at 217-629-7970. We're going to talk about this for the majority of this hour, so get your phone calls ready at 217-629-7970. But back to the chat, the governor, he was asked about the Protect Illinois Communities Act. That's the ban on certain semi-automatic firearms. And he kind of talks about where they're at in the court case and his thoughts on gun ownership. Here's the governor.
It's a long haul to get something important like this done, especially in a Midwestern state where we have 3/4 of the state is essentially rural, and there are a lot of people for whom guns are part of their tradition. And it's not that they're seeking to commit crimes with those guns, but they view this as something that's part of their heritage. And so when you've got people out there who feel that strongly about it and who look at the Constitution and say, well, gee, it says right there that I have a right, it becomes difficult to overcome that in the legislature, even when you have a majority of the public supporting the position that I take.
And I think it's interesting just to really, think about that Second Amendment language, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But the governor talked also about what he thinks is the reason for people owning guns.
We needed to make sure that everybody understood what the real goal here is, which is not to take away people's tradition of hunting, not to attack people's ability to for use a gun for sporting use, for example, or even for self-defense, but rather to take weapons of mass destruction, weapons of war off the streets, and that it's, again, there's no gun grab here. This was an effort to genuinely rationalize the kinds of weapons that are available.
So Governor J.B. Pritzker saying there was no, quote, gun grab here. But he also laid out his thoughts on why he thinks people own firearms for hunting or for sport or even possibly self-defense. But the central question is, can the government dictate to somebody what kind of firearm they can use to defend themselves? A lot of pushback from gun control advocates saying that AR-15 style semi-automatic rifles are akin to, quote, weapons of war or are akin to mass killing machines. And you heard at the top there, and we'll likely hear this a little bit later on as well, the governor says you can't have, rocket launchers and things like that. So obviously the Second Amendment issue and the questions surrounding what kinds of firearms are included in the Second Amendment, that's a conversation that the courts are dealing with right now. But to get to the courts, the governor, he talked about the progression of, them passing the bill to ban certain semi-automatic weapons. He talked about the litigation that followed. He said within hours, it was actually about a week after the law was enacted. And he also propped up the NRA, which, if you guys have been following the past year or so of litigation across the country that's been moving, the NRA really has not been instrumental at all in a lot of that. I think a lot of that's been from, the Firearms Policy Coalition. You've also seen the Gun Owners of America step up, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and a variety of other groups outside of the NRA that have been filing litigation that's actually bringing about some rulings from these federal judges across the country concerning gun litigation. But regardless, the governor used the NRA as a way of being a foil of sorts last night in front of this group talking about gun control efforts. Here's the governor. And go.
So we knew this was not going to be over immediately after passing it, but, every journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first steps. And signing the legislation was the first step. Battling it out in court, and each level of court was going to be the next step. But remember, 8 states preceded us. So it wasn't like we had broken new ground nationally, but we did break new ground in Illinois. And the fighting the NRA in Illinois, for the legislators that have been in this job for some time, I only came to Springfield in 2019, but there are some who've been there longer than I have, and they know that the Illinois State Rifle Association and related organizations have a lot of power. They just do. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of power, and they've been utilizing it for many years to block legislation that stands up for gun safety for the people of Illinois.
Well, the reason they're trying to block that legislation is because they're getting courts to find that certain gun laws, maybe some of you out there say all gun laws, are a violation of civil liberties found in the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution. There's a lot more from last night, guys. We'll get to it, I promise, but I would love to hear your calls at 217-629-7970. Again, we're reviewing Governor J.B. Pritzker, a nearly hour-long fireside chat that he held with those who support gun control. We also will hear a little bit about safety, that the governor says, he was even asked, should the National Guard be on the streets in Chicago, violence intervention programs, and so on. But a lot of the conversation hinged on gun control efforts. So stay tuned. We'll get to much more of that throughout the program here with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. And we'll get your phone calls coming up as well. We're hearing some segments from a nearly hour-long fireside chat that Governor J.B. Pritzker had with gun control and gun violence prevention groups at a event up in Chicago. And a lot to get to still here. Here he talks about the status of litigation against the gun and magazine ban he enacted earlier this year. And he seems to downplay the significance of the Illinois Supreme Court. Here's the governor.
The cases that you really want to watch are the cases in the federal court. And I think, here's my optimism. We know what the Supreme Court looks like these days, but I have some optimism that we may be successful because in the appellate court in Chicago, there were 2 of the 3 judges on the appellate court who spoke out during the hearing, asking questions of the plaintiffs about the issue of whether or not, the case was being made that the Supreme Court ruling Bruin had essentially said, well, gee, if it's in common use, then a gun should be allowed. And that you can't ban something that's in common use. And they were making the case that, well, AR-15s, for example, are in common use because there are millions of them across the United States. And the 2 judges essentially responded by saying, so it's a popularity contest now? If you can get a gun out there in enough people's hands, all of a sudden it becomes okay for everybody to have one of these weapons that can kill, dozens of people in a very short period of time, or as in the case in Highland Park, fire 83 bullets in less than 60 seconds. Those are okay because, it's become in wide use. This is a great point. One of those 2 judges was a Reagan-appointed judge, the other one a Clinton-appointed judge, and they are 2 of the 3. So it gives me hope that we're going to win at that level. I don't know whether we will or not, but I think that reasoning will carry to the Supreme Court, to some of the justices that may have voted to weaken our gun safety laws, and recognize that, we can't allow people to have shoulder-fired missiles. There's some limit to what we can allow people to have, and they're going to have to recognize that it shouldn't be a popularity contest.
Again, you heard even a couple of weeks ago the governor talking about shoulder-fired missiles and bazookas and rocket launchers, and the gun rights advocates in court said that it's not about those weapons, which really, outside of court, people analyzing this saying that those are indiscriminate. You throw a grenade, it goes off. I throw shrapnel all over the place. A semi-automatic firearm is a precise pinpoint firearm that allows for the individual to strike a single target if they're proficient enough, right? So interesting to hear some of what the governor's thinking is behind the trajectory of litigation against Illinois' gun and magazine ban. We've got a lot more to get to, including the governor laying out what are really the political realities on the ground in Springfield when it comes to gun laws. He also talks about steps he wants to see continue going forward, and a little bit about safety as well, and whether or not you'll see different types of things like taxes or insurance for gun owners and more. So stay tuned. Tons more to get to. And, of course, I want to hear your phone calls at 217-629-7970. Right now, though, we got to take a break. Last night, Governor J.B. Pritzker had a fireside chat, about an hour long. He answered questions about gun violence prevention, but a lot of it dealt with gun control. And we heard a little bit about him saying that, he's confident the message that the appellate court could send to the U.S. Supreme Court will be that, people can't have rocket launchers. Why can they have AR-15s? But he also said that he's, got about 30% chance, he says, of the U.S. Supreme Court upholding the state's gun and magazine ban. But how do we get here? The governor lays out the political realities. He talked about how, the state legislature is essentially in the hands of Democrats. Here's the governor from last night at this fireside chat.
Of the House of Representatives to vote for something, you need 30 members of the Senate to vote for it, and you need one governor to sign it. And so we had to negotiate to get to 60-31 and to make sure it was actually an effective bill, because there are some of the assault weapons bans that are out there that are less effective than the one that that got passed. So I'm proud of what we got done, but it was a collective endeavor. The fact that Moms Demand Action and other organizations were already so active even before the Highland Park shooting, and were able to jump on this as quickly as they were. And, you know, frankly, we are more powerful. Those of us who are gun safety advocates are more powerful today than we've ever been before. We have 78 Democrats. I'll leave it at that. We've won a lot of seats in the House and the Senate, and we have the governorship.
So again, the governor laying out the political realities there. But I'd love to hear from you at 217-629-7970. That's the phone number. So far, we've heard a lot from the governor. One commenter on YouTube says, JB, if any of that is true, why did you carve out law enforcement and security still being able to own them? So it's okay to use them against the citizens. So interesting perspective there, and you can sound off as well at 217-629-7970. But let's hear more from the governor. We've heard this before as well, but the governor says that there needs to be a national ban on semi-automatic firearms.
So we have a lot of effort that we have to put in, not just to gun safety legislation, but to fighting poverty in the communities where most of the shootings are happening. So not to recommend organizations, just to say to you, if you can reach out and help in the violence intervention organizations that hire people that are returning citizens who've served time and have come back to their communities and want to do something good for their community, those organizations are hugely in need. We at the legislative level and my job as governor, we have budgeted. In fact, I was just on the phone with one of the representatives talking about what we're going to do, budgeting going forward for these violence intervention organizations. And then the last thing I'll say is that we have to pass a national ban on assault weapons.
So, again, the governor, he's said that before, but more from last night at a fireside chat with Governor J.B. Pritzker, sounding off on what he wants to see happen here in the future when it comes to guns and gun control.
We've got to support organizations that are supporting people who get elected to Congress who are going to pass an assault weapons ban. So if you want to do something, please do that.
So the assault weapons statute also increases the...
Did I mention re-elect President Biden? Sorry.
So the governor there kind of joking about re-electing President Biden. I'm sure that there's a lot of people hearing this saying, the governor's just setting himself up to run for president. But the governor has been adamant that he is not looking to run for the White House, but instead is supporting President Joe Biden's re-election campaign. So next up, let's see here. We've got the governor talking about a variety of other things, including the measure that would allow for private right of action against gun manufacturers for advertising. And we've seen this, of course, in the debate around it as to whether that's constitutional or not. And obviously, it's something that's going to be litigated. But the governor last night being asked about this and essentially says that what passed and what's on his desk has yet to be signed. He says it didn't necessarily go as far as maybe some advocates have wanted the legislation to go. Dan, let's do this.
So the idea is to prevent them allowing private rights of action against manufacturers so that they're deterred from promoting the use of guns in these ways. So that's what it is. Now, it's not as you know, there are proposals to allow private rights of action against gun manufacturers for the use of guns in felonies, and that would obviously be an effective way to shut down manufacture of certain kinds of guns, or even the gun manufacturer itself. That's not what got passed, but that also would have likely ended up with a significant suit that would end up going to the Supreme Court and probably being rejected. But this is a good step forward and a good signal to the manufacturers that we're not going to allow them to take advantage of their ability to manipulate people with advertising and marketing to what it ultimately is, promote the use of guns in violent crime.
So, again, the governor talking about the measure that would allow for private rights of action against gun manufacturers based off the advertising that they put out there. And he says it didn't go necessarily as far as they may have wanted it to go. But the governor also chiming in on the U.S. Supreme Court and the prospects of what could possibly happen moving forward.
I do think that we have, I don't know what percentage chance to put on it, but it is not zero chance,
with the
and
gun
it
ban,
is not,
the challenge in the federal courts.
30% chance. I think it's better than that we will win. I don't know what percent to put on it. I just think that we have a pretty good argument, and it's demonstrated by the quality of the bill that got passed and signed here in Illinois, and the commentary of the appellate court judges. So, when you say where is it all going, we're in this terrible situation where essentially it's been made, available to everybody to go buy almost any. Lots of handguns are available to everybody in the audience and everybody out there in the world, and more of them have been purchased. And I think did I read that we have 390 million guns in private hands in a country that has about, 340 million people in it. And that doesn't mean that everybody in this room has a gun, but it means that somebody else out there has more than one gun. And as I said before, there are lots of people buying guns not because they feel like they, should have a gun, or, but because now they feel like everybody else has a gun. And so they have to protect themselves, or they want to be like their neighbors.
So the governor says people only own firearms because they want to keep up with the Joneses? This
is the world we're living in, and it was just abroad in the UK. They can't believe what's going on with guns in the United States, and they don't understand how rational society like ours can let the continuation of, the growth of gun ownership, particularly very deadly weapons, continue to harvest among us.
The history there that we have with the United Kingdom, with Great Britain, when it comes to firearms, we have the Second Amendment because Great Britain was trying to be a tyrannical government against the colonists in the United States. So, yeah, interesting. I guess, that's a conversation for another day, but we continue on because last night's fireside chat touched on a whole host of other things. And, of course, we've got to get to it. We'll finish up this hour with a few more clips, but also I want to hear from you. 217-629-7970. That's the phone number here with Springfield's Morning News on WMAY. Well, this entire hour, we've been reviewing some of what Governor J.B. Pritzker had to say at a fireside chat last night in Chicago. Somebody on YouTube saying, did he roast marshmallows? No, he talked about gun control. And some other comments that definitely wanted to highlight from last night's chat. And here's the governor talking about what else can be done, right? He passed a ban on semi-automatic weapons and magazines being litigated in the courts. He was asked about other gun violence prevention efforts, and then I think some of you might feel he said the quiet part out loud. Here is Governor J.B. Pritzker.
So we've got, a pretty good handle on what we need to do. The challenge, of course, is you don't know which cars. We're not allowed to track which cars are driving from Chicago across the border, going to an Indiana store, buying a gun, and coming back. We're not allowed to track that car. On the other hand, we can watch the routes that are normally taken from Indiana back into Illinois, and with a variety of technology and other things, make a reasonable guess. And again, using only probable cause and other things to pull them over. But we have to do more of this. We just have to.
So the governor, is he referencing automatic license plate reading technology? I mean, we had a segment on that yesterday with Illinois State Police talking about how they're setting those up all over the place and close to Missouri and up in Chicago and elsewhere throughout the entire state, and these can all be linked together and whatnot. Is that something he's talking about? The state already prohibits people being tracked if they're coming from out of state into state for abortions. They've carved that out of the law, but just putting that out there, the governor seemed to hint at, quote, technologies to be able to track cars possibly being involved in firearms trafficking. So again, interesting to hear that. The governor was also asked about possibly setting up laws that would require people lock up firearms in their own homes, and he says essentially that the government needs to make sure that people are kept safe in their own homes. Here's the governor.
I think if you're going to own a gun, you have to be responsible with it. And this is one way for us to demand and ask people to do the right thing and keep them safe in their own homes. So I'll just leave it there.
So I've been given a few more questions here. So, okay, so we talked about taxing.
I should look at the legislators here and say, so you guys are going to introduce that, right? Okay.
Right.
And again, the political realities that the governor laid out was that they control both the House and the Senate and the governor's office, and that's what you need to pass legislation. So we'll see what other types of things come up. He also talked about insurance, requiring that. He talked about possible taxation issues and the like. So obviously, this is a ongoing debate that's going to be had at the Illinois State House, regardless of what we see happen out of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals and all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But one other thing, the governor took questions from the audience via cue card because the moderator was accepting some cue cards and pushing those up to the governor so that he could answer them. One in particular deals with a question that a 10-year-old asked. Here's that question from last night's fireside chat.
So I was given a question by a 10-year-old member of the audience who asked a question.
A future voter.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And perhaps one of the most difficult questions. Why are there shops where you can buy guns? Aren't the materials unsafe?
What was the last one?
Aren't these materials unsafe to have in a store that you could walk in and buy?
Well, let's start with, I don't want to, who's the 8-year-old or 10, did you say a 10-year-old right here? Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is important. And without getting into any legalistic anything, just know that if we're going to allow people to have guns at all, and there are those who might say we shouldn't, but if we're going to allow people, then there has to be some way for them to obtain those. They're going to have to pay for them. And so, that's why those stores exist. Having said that, you're asking a question that leads to, a very important other question, which is, these are very dangerous items. Why are they so easy to get? And I think that's the best question you've asked so far.
Of course it is.
But, people who support the right to keep and bear arms will just point right back to the Second Amendment, which says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's why there are gun stores. All right, stay tuned. We got more coming up.
From the Fly SPI Studios, take the easy way out.